Today I'm chatting with Patrick McKeown, leading international expert on breathing and sleep and author of a number of books, including The Oxygen Advantage, which I have behind me, which I'm reading at the moment. Cheers for jumping on, Patrick. And so, kind of following on from what we were just chatting about before we hit record, I am coaching a team at the moment doing mental skills, and the last week brought them through kind of a guided meditation to just introduce them. It's Canterbury under 19s. Introduce them to bring in awareness to their breath, we'll say, and close their mouth and kind of nasal breathing, and just kind of starting that. And at the end, after they're all kind of relaxed, and I was kind of just chatting to them and any questions. And one guy said, "Why not breathe through the nose and out through the mouth?" And that, I think, is just one of the most common things I remember hearing all the time when I was growing up: in through the nose, out through the mouth. So I suppose to start off, why not in through the nose and out through the mouth, or why through the nose and out through the nose?
I suppose nature, what has nature done? It's give us a nose to breathe in and out through, We've never seen an animal in the wild breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. If you look at the fastest animal on earth, the cheetah, nasal breathing all the way. The racehorse, nasal breathing all the way. So there's very few exceptions in nature who use their mouth to breathe, except for the human animal. And our ancestors didn't breathe this way. Our ancestors didn't breathe with their mouths open. They breathed exclusively through their noses. Now, I understand during physical exercise, when the person is gassed out, to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, you get rid of carbon dioxide, you get rid of air hunger, and as a result, then you reduce the sensation of breathlessness. But that's only one example. It really doesn't make sense otherwise to be breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth, especially during rest, because if we breathe out through the mouth, we're losing moisture. There's a 42% greater water loss breathing out through the mouth, so it contributes to dehydration. And also, if we breathe out through the mouth, it's a faster breath out. So in terms of inducing relaxation and recovery and stimulating the vagus nerve and improving heart rate variability or optimizing it, it's very important to have a slow and relaxed exhalation. So when we think of the breath and we think of the inhalation and we think of the exhalation, the speed of the inhalation doesn't really matter when it comes to inducing a relaxation response. You could have it soft, you could have it slow, you could have it fast. Better to have it normal. But it's really down to the speed of the exhalation. So when you take a soft breath in through the nose and you have that really slow and relaxed and a gentle breath out, you stimulate the vagus nerve, which is wandering throughout the human body, and 80 to 90% of the communication is from the body up to the brain. And by stimulating the vagus nerve, it secretes a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, and this causes the heart rate to slow down. And when the heart rate is slowing down, the brain is interpreting that the body is safe. So even a simple instruction, because I think you're right, introducing breathing, but introducing one thing that people get. And I often feel that when I'm working with youngsters, and I'm talking about even 20-year-olds, that they will come across situations, they will lose focus, their mind is racing, they're feeling stressed, they're going into a situation that they're uncomfortable with. How do we tell the brain that the body is safe? Use your breathing. It's not about taking this deep breath. The deep breath often involves hyperventilation. Probably the worst instruction that anybody can give is to take a deep breath. Because a deep breath is involving taking, it can be a faster breath, it can be an upper chest breath, it can be a larger breath. And this gets rid of too much carbon dioxide from the lungs and blood, which in turn reduces blood flow to the brain. So I'll give you an example, Brian. I was going into, if I go into meetings and, like in terms of, I have a business too, and you're meeting with individuals and I'm meeting with groups of investors sometimes as well. And it can be challenging because number one is I'm out of my depth with that. I focus on breathing and I don't like the other stuff. So I need to self-regulate. And one particular meeting I had, I was left waiting for about 5 hours. This is on national live TV before going into an interview. And, you're preparing there because the wait can bring on tension because there's room for the mind to think. And I used my breathing to keep me focused and to get the critical mind out of the way and to be able to, keep my physiology in balance, that I'm not too stressed, but I'm not too relaxed either. I just wanted to be right. And then prior to the meeting, they left me outside the doors for 7 minutes. And at one point I could feel my heart rate coming up. And one of the producers said to me, he said, take a deep breath. And I said, no, I'm not taking a deep breath. And I started doing my own thing. Nobody even knows what you're doing. I took a soft breath in and just a gentle and really slow, relaxed breath out. It's completely silent. It's in and out through the nose. And it's as simple as that. I brought down my heart rate. I put the critical mind aside and I went into those individuals and I was fully there. And I wanted to be fully there. I didn't want to go in with a thinking mind. I wanted to go in a state where my attention was moving simultaneously. Because in that state, the right words appear. It's effortless. It's easier. And there's just something about it. The human mind often sabotages us. And breathing is one way in terms of altering our state of mind where we can access flow states. And people often talk about flow, and any athlete will know when they are in flow in a game because the right action happens. And it's almost that the game is slowing down. But the real question is, can athletes produce that at will? And by accessing breathing, and I'm not talking about any old breathing. There's a lot of breathing instruction out there. I'm talking about directed breathing to bring balance to the physiology. You don't want to be too stressed, nor do you want to be too relaxed. And actually, a little bit of stress is good. But how do you get to that state? And that's just an example. Yeah, I think it's tremendous to bring breathing into the 19-year-olds. There's so much to it. And we have to put this aside because breathing has been around for 50 years. And I often feel that people made a mess of it. They made a mess of it because they had all of these connotations and they used the wrong language and they were dressed in probably they were presenting themselves too left of field that the natural and normal audience wasn't able to identify with it. Yeah. There's, cut the crap with breathing and give it to a language that's suitable for the audience and give them the tools that they understand. If I do this, this is the result.
Yeah, 100% brilliant. And it's so true, a few things there, but exactly like you say about going into the meeting. And I find, myself every day, there is a moment like that, not as probably as high pressure, but like even before I get on every single podcast, I'm just getting my computer right. I'm getting my microphone right. I'm watching the minutes, 27 past, 28 past, 29 past. And I've, it's nothing to worry about so much, but I feel that little bit of heart rate just creeping up and I just connect to my breath. It just slow in through the nose, slowly out, and I just connect to the desk and what's around me and relax. And I've been doing this for a few years and it's like you kind of mentioned, it becomes a very quick process, a very quick kind of literally one breath in, one breath out process, which might be 30 seconds to 40 seconds. And within that 30 to 40 seconds, it's just all brought back. And the connection to the flow, wow, yeah, that's something that's just mad. The realization I had, the realization a couple of years ago, the connection of your breath as the gateway to the flow state.
And it can be trained. And I think this stuff should be taught in school. Like, we're not trained how to concentrate, nor are we trained how to deal with stress. And for me, concentration and focus and resilience, the ability to take life or the ups and downs of life. And sports teaches it. Like, I have a youngster, she's playing hurling. And I think it's tremendous because you learn life skills on the pitch as you do in a rugby pitch. And these skills you carry with you for the rest of your life. But at the same time, how many athletes are trained how to concentrate? And how many athletes, they have physical fatigue, maybe the 50th, 60th, 70th, whatever minute. They're having physical fatigue and that's bringing on mental fatigue. And now their mind is elsewhere and you lose focus. and then it's game over. We need also not just to train the body, but we also need to train the brain. And I'm not just talking about awareness of the breath. Awareness of the breath is tremendous. However, when the mind is racing, it's very difficult to be aware of anything. Instead, we need to be using the breath as a gateway to change our physiology. And I would even go as far as sleep quality is a part of that. And if you think of the rugby world, rugby players have a high risk of obstructive sleep apnea. And I don't know how much attention that gets in the rugby world. You're talking about generally bigger guys, gals as well, larger neck circumference. They're at a higher risk of stopping breathing and having a reduction in the flow of their breathing during sleep. This is a stress response. It's putting stress in the cardiovascular system. And there are rugby players who are dying in their 40s and 50s. Okay, I'm not saying it's massively common, but it happens. And the question that often comes to my mind is, could this player have had undiagnosed sleep apnea? And even these players can be at international levels. So there's stuff in rugby that's been overlooked. The other thing I think that's really worth talking about is concussion. Because I think this is going to come more and more to the forefront. And if you break down a concussion, they first tested it in animal models. And they found that post-concussion, there's a reduction of blood supply to the brain. Now, if we think of the brain, 15 to 20% of the cardiac output goes to the brain. 750 milliliters of blood goes to the brain every minute, as far as I know. So it's 15 to 20% of cardiac output. Post-concussion, there's a reduction of blood supply to the brain. And this can persist for weeks and months following concussion, even when the individual has no symptoms. The symptoms normally abate after 7 to 10 days. But the question to ask is, when there's a reduction of blood supply to the brain that's persisting for weeks and months, and this does carry risks of anxiety, PTSD, depression, and on an extreme, stroke. So there's a conversation worth having there. Is it worthwhile doing a breathing exercise that's very gentle to help improve blood flow to the brain? And you can do that by simply going for a walk or jog with your mouth closed. You can do that by breathing light, by taking a very soft breath in through the nose and a really relaxed and slow, gentle breath out, under breathing, to develop a feeling of air hunger, which signifies that carbon dioxide is increased in the blood. And as carbon dioxide increases in the blood, physiologically, it's a known vasodilator to improve blood flow to the brain. Eating foods that are rich in nitrates, beets, for example, beetroot. So there's things that players can be doing post-concussion to help their own health. And I'm not sure why there's no research in this. I even just, in preparation for this morning, I did a Google and I searched breath holding or breathing exercises post-concussion. There's hardly anything on the net, but it's a normal physiological response. There's that aspect of it. There's preparation for athletes going out onto the field. Some athletes will have varying degrees of nerves, and you want to get all of these athletes that they are all in the right frame of mind. And you can interweave during the warm-up nose breathing, light breathing, slow breathing, low breathing. That's a down regulator even during the warm-up. And it's not that coaches have anything extra to do. They just look at how are these players doing the warm-up, switch them to nose breathing, and ask them, instead of taking faster upper chest breathing, which is activating a stress response even during the warm-up, talk about nose, slow and low. The diaphragm is linked with the emotions, but the diaphragm is also providing stabilization for the spine. So those athletes then getting into a scrum, they need to have absolute stability. But if they're an upper chest or a dysfunctional breather, and in one paper, 1,900 athletes that was published in 2022, 90% of the athletes, regardless of whether they were school kids or professional athletes, 90% of them had dysfunctional breathing. Now that increases the risk of injury, but I'm going to come back down to the warm-up. There's things that can be woven into the warm-up, down regulating first. You're preparing, because the warm-up shouldn't be just about warming the muscles. The warm-up should be about getting the right mental focus into play. The warm-up should be about opening up the airways. The warm-up should be about spleen contraction. So there's many things that we can do during the warm-up and enhance then the player's ability on the field. Now, during play, do whatever you have to do. Forget about your breathing. Focus on the ball. Have your mouth open at times, of course it's necessary. But also breathe through your nose as much as you can because it improves visuospatial awareness. And visuospatial awareness is your ability to have your attention on the ball, but also you're scanning everything. So this is something that has developed throughout our evolution, and it was first identified in 2019 that researchers, you can imagine, 1,000 years ago, we were out in a wide plain and we may have had our focus on a target, but we also had to be scanning for predators. So it's a very natural human function that is very relevant to a pitch and very relevant to field sports. There's just a few examples, but I've got many more.
Brilliant, brilliant. You're speaking my language or to all of my biases. And I like I was chatting to you, I started learning about this about 3 years ago when I was still playing, and my mind was blown. I was like, nearly everything that players and coaches are looking at is like there's just a small piece of it is nearly wrong. It's just a small piece of it. Like when you talk about warm-ups, most coaches think of a warm-up as let's go through our lineouts, our back plays, let's get them jogging and then build up the intensity and then play. But there's nothing to do with the mind there. They have not they have not thought about the mind once. They have thought about plays. Plays. As a player, I've done it for 20 years. You know you know the plays. You don't need to run through the plays and the coach telling you what plays. And that's another thing for flow state is you don't be thinking, and you don't want to be, have to think about certain things before a game. It's all about just getting into the right mental state and getting into the zone, like you say. And the nose breathing, yeah, just connecting to it. And of course, like you say, you breathe through the mouth, and it's something that you just found you bring awareness to it as much as you can during your day, during your training. And another thing to note is that my experience is it's very difficult at first to switch from mouth breathing to nose breathing. I heard all this, I read all this, and then it's like it's so beneficial, it's so beneficial. And in training, I'd be running around, I'd be trying to close my mouth and breathe through my nose, and I'd be fact. like, so that's one thing it is challenging, the switch over.
Yeah, but we don't have to have 100% nose breathing. We have to be realistic as well. There's times at which, low and moderate intensity, the mouth should be closed. See, weightlifters, rugby players go to the gym. They understand that if they want to strengthen a muscle, they put an extra load onto it. But what about the breathing muscle? What about the diaphragm? What happens when the diaphragm gets tired during play? Blood is stolen from the legs, and the legs are giving out. You have to think that the human body will sacrifice everything to maintain breathing. Breathing is a much more important function than running. And the human body is going to sacrifice the legs to maintain good blood flow and supply to the diaphragm. But we can strengthen the diaphragm. So when we think about, say, for example, switching to nose breathing during the warm-up and during low to moderate exercise, it's adding an extra load that's a challenge, but nothing extreme. So it's not necessarily about going for a sprint. Okay, we do some sprinting with the mouth closed, but we never want to do it to the point that it's excruciating because you could injure your nose. And we also do sprinting with breath holds. And I'll give you this example. There's a French researcher called Woorons, and he was working with rugby union players. He got 21 rugby union players, and this was during peak season. Divided them into two groups. In one group, he had them do 40-meter sprints with a breath hold after exhalation. The same stuff as you're reading in the book. In the other group, he had them sprint with normal breathing for 40 meters. And it was a departure every 30 seconds. The repeated sprint ability before the trial was about 9 reps. After 4 weeks of training, The group who were doing the 40-meter sprint with a breath hold after exhalation increased their repeated sprint ability from 9 reps to 14 point something reps. The group who were doing their repeated sprints with normal breathing, which normal breathing is normally, of course, mouth open, they had a very small increase. I think it was from 9 to 10 reps. Now, we're talking about elite pro rugby union players here. Normally, if you get a 1% gain, it's huge. But to increase a performance determinant such as repeated sprint ability, because it's really relevant in rugby as it is in team sports. Repeated sprint ability is your ability to do all-out effort, followed by a very brief recovery before an all-out effort again. And it's exhausting, but you can train that. And that paper is published. And, there's just another example that we're using breathing, adding that extra load onto the individual. So there's 2 components that I see when I'm working with people. I see the down regulation, the recovery. This is really, really important. The sleep component, improving heart rate variability, bringing balance to the autonomic nervous system, training focus and concentration. This is all very important. This is your everyday breathing stuff. And then we have the challenges. We have the sprinting with breath holds. We have the jogging. We have the faster running with the mouth closed. So we have the stressor component of it, and we also have the relaxing component of it. And it's about bringing it together. And it's having a toolbox. We use about 26 different techniques, knowing which exercise to use in a specific situation. But these exercises are simple. And you can break down a game of rugby. You can talk about what do we do during the warm-up, what to do in play. Normally I say forget about your breathing. But of course, if the ball is elsewhere, make sure that you are nose breathing. But what do you do if you get sin binned? So you have the players sin binned, and now they're thinking about what the coach is going to say to them after the game. That's a disruption to their mindset. Now they're feeling that they've let down the players, and they're going out onto that field, whereas they should be using that for recovery. That should be re-energizing, getting back your focus and going back out on that. Okay, you've been sin binned, but now go back out in a better frame of mind. You're after having a 10-minute or whatever it is, 10-minute break. You're going back out in a better frame of mind. You're going to make up for that. What do you do during half time? What do you do going from the pitch back to the dressing room in terms of recovery? Conserve your energy during half time. It's not a time for wasting energy. It's all about conservation, and you can use breathing in that. And it's almost that, resetting is very, very important, because we can make mistakes and we never want to carry that mistake throughout the rest of the game. And the people who have the ability that, regardless of whatever is after happening in the past, that they can move on from that, they can put it behind them, they can compartmentalize it, and it's almost as if it's never happened. That's the key. And the other aspect is, like, the leader of any game is the guy or gal who is able to maintain focus under pressure. The leader is not the individual. When everything is going right, the leader doesn't have much to do. It's when things are going wrong that the leader steps up to the plate. And that leader, by having an absolute determinant and focus and being able to stay calm under pressure, is then able to rally the rest of the team to set that example. And these are just examples. And then post-match, what about recovery? So how do you have to bring down your heart rate quicker? And the physiology there is, of course, you want to stimulate the vagus nerve. By having that slow exhalation. I understand you're gassed out. Okay, you could do mouth in and a slow breath out through the mouth. And then you could do nose in and a slow breath out through the mouth. And then you could nose in and nose out. But all the time, you're looking to slow down the speed of the exhalation to bring down the heart rate for recovery post-physical exercise.
Yeah, brilliant. And for this, so many things there that I'm going to get to one or two, but to show how obvious this is can you imagine, say, a coach listening or a person listening, to show how important the breath is? Imagine if you're doing a cool down. So a cool down is a thing in rugby, you stretch. Imagine if all the players were lined up stretching and they were panting through their mouth like this. How effective would that cool down be? It's very obvious when you put it like that.
Yeah.
Like, anyone gets that. They're like, well, obviously not, Brian. So that just shows. And A way I explained it as well to someone just starting out with the relaxation and how that breath can actually be good is before a 1 rep max in the gym. I remember before doing a bench press 1 rep max, you breathe like that to get to kind of upregulate your nervous system to get the blood flowing to boom, get 1 rep. And then for the relaxation, and it's so interesting you say that. I put a reel out there earlier in the week about literally what you just said, in that rugby players, when they get a moment of a break in play, should act the way a boxer acts on the stool. So a boxer fights hard for their, like that's the most extreme, or UFC fighter. And when they go back to the stool, boom, they are just complete relaxation. They close their mouth, they sit into the chair, they get maybe some ice on their neck, they breathe through their nose, they down regulate everything. They go into the fight, boom, they're back at it. So a rugby player, and there's many breaks in play in rugby. It's, the ball gets kicked into the stands, like you say, stop, connect to the breath, relax the body. It could be a 3 second, an 8 second, a 12 second thing. It's more of the mental thing about you telling your body that and you just doing that. And it's so interesting to say that, like, there's so many coaches in rugby, on rugby teams now, professional rugby teams. There's 10, there's S&C, and this is what I fully believe, is that the mind is now where strength and conditioning was in rugby when the game turned professional 25 years ago. They all started saying, let's get to the gym and get stronger. And I'd put it out there. Are there professional teams that, like you said about the sin bin, who have trained their players of how to rest and recover and refocus when they are sin binned? Has any team done that as a protocol and trained their players for it? Because the way the game is, nearly every game, there's probably a sin bin, close to. But what happens then, I bet, is you go over to the sin bin, like you say, I'm letting the team down, I'm letting the fans down. Oh, what's everyone thinking? And that's just the exact opposite. That's the worst. Whereas teams should bring their players through that. And it's a very simple explanation, a very simple, training. You can do it as a training on the field. You can go, Patrick, you're sin binned over to that chair. And then Patrick leaves the training ground and goes over to the chair and practices. And it's borderline like a meditation, what you're kind of saying. You relax into the chair, you close your mouth, you breathe slowly, you slow your breathing down through your nose, and fascinating. Yeah.
And like, Brian, if somebody says, well, you're going to be too down regulated, it's very easy to upregulate.
Yeah.
All you have to do then is do a couple of faster breaths, And the other thing is, are we playing with our head or are we playing with our body? There's a big difference that if you go out and do any sort of physical exercise, and if you do the physical exercise with your attention stuck in your head, it's almost that the head is disconnected to the body. You want to go out onto that field with every cell of your body. You want to play with every cell of your body. And having your attention dispersed throughout the body, and just what you spoke about earlier on, you were training for 20 years, you were playing for 20 years. All of that information is stored in the brain. There's a muscle memory there. We need to get the mind out of the way and to allow that, if it's intuition or training or whatever it is, to allow that to dictate, because it's already stored there. But if we're thinking too much, we're not going to allow the muscle memory kick in. Dispersing attention throughout the body is not something that you will practice just on the day of the game. This is something that we need to be bringing into our everyday life. But however, I'm nearly 50 years of age. I was fortunate to come across this 25 years ago. I will genuinely say, on a personal basis, it was one of the best things that I have ever learned to get through life. These tools are not just for the rugby pitch. If we give these out to youngsters, they have that and it will improve their resilience. And at the moment, we have to think of the wider picture here. Mental health issues, distraction, attention deficit, poor sleep. The mind is a mess, and it's made worse by Instagram and social media because it's cluttering the head. I was lucky enough, for the first 25 years of my life, I didn't have social media. I didn't have mobile phones. I had none of that. And if I was bored, It was a reset because, okay, I'd be looking around or might daydream. But now, when people are bored, the first thing that they reach into is their phone, their mobile phone. They're scrolling aimlessly with useless information. And there's an awful lot of pressure on people as well. You know, these devices have been created in a way with social media by teams of behavioral psychologists that know us better than we know ourselves. And I find it's really, really sinister. There's a 19 or 20-year-old there. They're looking at themselves on social media. They're looking at other people. They're feeling inadequate because other people are looking better than them or have more likes. They post, they get so many likes. The next day they post again, and they're competing against themselves. They're competing against everybody else. They're competing against themselves. It's something that we can all do without. And I can imagine that in a competitive world, that's gone to the next level with these trolls that are saying and making remarks. And, like there's something really. So, what I would say is forget about the mobile phone. Social media myself, I limit it absolutely. Okay. I'm lucky enough I have a staff member that does her own social media. But we have to be very careful. If we want to have that quality of mind on the pitch, we have to think about the quality of mind off the pitch. If we want to have good breathing practice on the pitch, we need to think about good breathing practice off the pitch. We can't be practicing distraction all day long and then expect to be fully focused going out into the game. And the bar is low here because nobody is doing it. Like you talked about S&C coaches. I spoke with S&C coaches in the IRFU, in the English Roses, through the All Blacks, and different teams. But I'm not sure how much of this are they actually getting. I have yet to go into a rugby team, and I have yet to bring that team and bring them through their paces, because it's a different story me talking to an S&C coach and they're transmitting this information to a team. I've 20 years, I've muscle memory. I've 20 years of experience, and there's something valuable there because the communication and pushing it, that gets through to the team. But I will say, even if an S&C takes 5% of what we're talking about today and starts introducing it, it's still better than nothing.
You're so spot on, and it's something that you need to live it and you need to be it. Simple
Yes.
as you can't say, I heard about this nose breathing on a podcast, lads. Breathe through your nose. It just in any coaching that never works. Be it a backser coach or a lineout coach, you can never. You need to know something so well that you can teach it in your own words. And this is no
Yes.
different because players detect it straight away if there's a if you don't know it that well, and it's just the next level. Yeah, it's the next level. Like, and I've been to professional teams and stuff as well, and spoke to people and seen things, and yeah, there's just another, it's just another level. It's another level, and it excites me, and it's like, look, there's I just started the path that I'm on. And you mentioned mental health, and that's how I got onto this path. About 5, 6 years ago, I got a shoulder injury, got really depressed, and just started reading into anything I could to help me get better. Breathing was one of them, mindfulness, spirituality, psychology, stoicism, any philosophy, Buddhism, all this stuff. I was
Mm.
just reading everything I could.
Mm.
And that's how I then went back out of the field and was just playing. It was like I cracked the code completely. And so I just started, there was no one doing this, or I had heard of mental skills, and I was like trying to Google mental skills coaches, and I found a few, and I've spoke to them on this podcast, and it's yeah, it's just it's mad. It blows my mind. But I was just like, here, I need to start sharing this stuff. I need to just start. I need to just start, set up a page, set up a podcast, chat to people, set up, and just get the word out there. And just going back to, you mentioned mental health, and cold showers are something that I find very important for my own mental health. You mentioned the vagus nerve, and I'm not quite sure the connection. You'll probably know it, but the and I've spoken to them. People, it's come up where people on here we chat about cold showers. It just comes up, but that's about the breath. It's not about the mind. It's not mind over matter. A cold shower. The cold water is a tool which allows you to instantly slow down and calm your breath. So when it's not about like when you jump into a cold shower, it's not about like going like
Well, some
and
people
just
do.
exactly and that's torture. That's torture. It's about just calming the breath instantly, and that's a practice. And then when you do, you it's the epitome of mindfulness. I don't know how to explain it.
It's about surrendering to discomfort.
Yeah.
So if you think of our modern life, it's all about comfort, but if you think throughout our evolution, we had many times of discomfort. Human beings are very resilient. We are very good at coping with things that happen in general, and we've been trained that way, and I suppose we've evolved that way. But modern life has kind of lost a lot of that. So if you go into a cold shower, it's uncomfortable. And the mental aspect there is that you're feeling something that's uncomfortable and you're surrendering to the discomfort to train your brain not to react to discomfort. And that skill then when something happens then in your normal everyday life that's uncomfortable, you don't have the same reaction, because it's very important to be able to maintain composure when something goes wrong. We don't want to go into a fight or flight response, because a fight or flight response is when the brain wants to get us out of the situation. There's times, of course, when that happens, but it's not the right approach. I was listening to a podcast by Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. He was interviewing a brain surgeon called Dr. Rahul, and I've often used this. I wrote about it in one of the books, and Dr. Rahul he says, when I get into a difficult situation, now you can imagine he's a brain surgeon. Now, I can't think of anything that's more kind of challenging, even regardless of his training. He says, when I get into a difficult situation, the first thing I do is prevent myself from hyperventilating. The first thing he does is prevents himself from hyperventilating. How many people know that? How many children and teenagers and adults and people in sports and people in the corporate world, when they get into a difficult situation, they respond by hyperventilating? So the cold shower, many people will respond by hyperventilating. But the thing about the cold shower, as you said, you go into it, it's uncomfortable, you're slowing down the breath and you're surrendering to the discomfort, and you're training your brain and you're training your breathing. I'm now in a difficult situation, but I'm not responding by hyperventilating. It's a skill. It's a skill. And the same with breath holding. Like with people with different degrees, in terms of people coming in with panic disorder or anxiety, they often feel terrified by suffocation. And of course, I've made mistakes in the past because I would give them a degree of suffocation which was too challenging for them. And I've put them unintentionally into panic attacks. But I learned from it. And it's really important to think that breathing is something that's individual to all of us. And very often, there's a breathing momentum gets out there and people are jumping on the bandwagon. They're saying this is the breathing technique that we should all be doing. Not necessarily. I think you need to understand what any breathing technique is doing, especially for you. It's very important to dip your toes into the water gently. So if I have somebody coming in with panic disorder, I give them a teaspoon of suffocation and I gently gear them up according to how that person is responding to the breathing techniques, because I don't want to put them into anxiety. This has happened, but over 20 years, you learn you actually learn from your mistakes, of course. These are the things that you really, something happens, you're saying, okay, there's something wrong here. And I couldn't quite figure it out. And it took me a little bit, because when I'm doing breathing exercise for myself, that's my experience. But you can have somebody else who's had a trauma in their past, as most of us had, high stress levels, genetic predisposition, near drowning incidents, or things like that. We need to tailor then breathing exercise, or at least go gently with those people, because they will respond stronger to the techniques. So, we see cold showers. People say, oh, macho, jump in there for 5 minutes. No, why not try it for 10 seconds? Dip your toe into the water, build it up. Next week, 15 seconds. Next week, 30 seconds. You're gently building it up in response to how your physiology is reacting to it.
Yeah, 100%. And another part of it is, just speaking about the mental side, is bit different from breathing, but is the actual doing of it. So like you just get, like say, 10 seconds. Like you just doing it for 10 seconds is going to give you, you feel good about yourself. You feel like obviously you've achieved something. You feel strong. You feel capable. You feel, and those are all great ways to feel and see yourself. Then when you take on your day, along with all the kind of the physiological benefits of it, and I was just chatting to another coach there 2 days ago, just on the sideline during training. He's kind of into his this all this kind of stuff as well, and he was saying, "Oh, I had a cold shower. I had them in the past. I'm going to get back into it now." And it's just we were chatting, and we kind of said like it's just about when you're going back into it. Just about start go to when you can relax your breath. It's not about time per se. It's about if you can do 10 seconds, your goal is to try and relax as much as you can. Or if you're doing 15, just try to relax. Try to relax. That's the goal versus getting more time. Because if you're hyperventilating on 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and still hyperventilating at a minute, it'll just be torture. So that's something, yeah, I think that's important. Two things I want to get onto. I suppose we'll start one, then the other. Just you kind of triggered my mind, but the working out while breath holding. So I've been doing it, as I said, for about 3 years now. When I go for a walk, I breathe in through my nose, breathe out, stop my breathing, and see how many steps I can do. Once again, from you. And the other one is taping your mouth when you sleep. That is just a game changer. There's two things. There's many things with sleep, but taking magnesium before bed I find incredible, and also taping my mouth before bed. And it's something I think everyone should do. And at the start, it can be kind of, I suppose, scary. If so, you say tape your mouth, oh, geez. So maybe, how do you start that? Do you start by taping your mouth during your day just to get acclimatized to it?
Yeah, I think it's very important for people to breathe through their nose during sleep.
Hmm.
And 50% of people will breathe through an open mouth and they wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. And the problem with that is that they have a lighter sleep and they're more prone to sleep apnea, they're more prone to snoring. And of course, a lighter sleep or sleep disruptions, you're going to have poor concentration. It's going to contribute to mental fatigue. You're not going to have the same focus or productivity during the day. So sleep is vital. But it's not just about sleep quantity. It's about sleep quality, and nasal breathing, and of course a cool, dark, airy bedroom. All of the sleep hygiene is important. We brought out a tape called MyoTape about 3 years ago. Now, we've always had a problem with having kids. How do we get kids switching to nose breathing? And it was never suitable to put a tape right across their lips. We're talking about 5 years of age, 6 years of age. The MyoTape is an elasticated tape. It's from Kinesio Tape, and it's cut into a strip with a cut-out portion. You stretch it, you apply it around the mouth, and it's the elastic tension that brings the lips together. So it's safe, but also from a psychological point of view, people adhere to it a lot easier because people do feel uncomfortable, especially people with, if they have any anxiety or, for example, if they have breathing issues, they'll say to themselves, I'd be suffocated. But the
Yes.
tape is there as an encouragement to breathe through the nose. And the other thing, Brian, is it's not just about taping them out at night. It's about practicing good habits during the day in terms of breathing in and out through the nose during wakefulness. If your nose gets stuffy, you can decongest it using the breath hold exercise that you did there, you spoke about. If people have anxiety or panic disorder or any serious medical conditions, go very easy with breath holding because it is a stressor and you don't want to stress your body too much. So for me, taping was a game changer. Like when I wasn't, I came out of university, I was in the corporate world, but I struggled. I left school originally at 14, never to go back to it. I couldn't hack the education system. I couldn't stay in the classroom because I didn't have the concentration and the mental focus to adhere what the teacher is saying. I wasn't disruptful. I just didn't care. And I left school at 14 because I wanted to have my own supermarkets, and I was working part-time in a supermarket anyway, even though I was working there since 11, but this is back in the 1980s. You could do that. Labor laws were different than they were now. I was only part-time. But so, my goal was, I was always driven. But I got through school. I ended up going back to school a year later. and I did the intercert. No, I'd left after the intercert. I studied for the leaving cert. I didn't get the points. I did it again, and I got into TCD. It could have been a lot easier. Nobody taught me how to concentrate. Nobody spoke about my sleep quality. I went in Erasmus to Sweden with an exchange with Uppsala University, and I was told in the dormitories that I was stopping breathing during sleep. I had no idea what it was, but I was exhausted all the time. We can have sleep apnea from a very young age. And I have, as a mouth breather, increased risk, high palate, jaws that are set back, craniofacial changes associated with mouth breathing because of having asthma and a stuffy nose from a young age. No doctor had ever said it to me. So, I'm just thinking about, you're talking about sleep quality. When I started taping my mouth closed, okay, I used a nasal dilator because I have a very small nasal airway and a stuffy nose. I used a nasal dilator to help make sure I was maintaining nasal breathing. And it was about the second night I woke up the second morning after taping my mouth. And I genuinely say, I woke up feeling refreshed. I had never experienced it like that before. And you think that this is something. And I have to say there was resistance and resistance and resistance and all of this work, resistance. But now we're seeing a change. We're seeing a massive change. And the Washington Post wrote an article there about 2 days ago. Iga, I can't pronounce her surname. She's number one in the world in women's tennis. She was training with her mouth taped. And that's only a snapshot. Like, we're working with military, we're working with police, we're working with world number one MMA fighters, boxers at high ranking. We've got 3,000 or 4,000 instructors across 50 countries. This is all happening. But, so breathing isn't this thing, because when people think about taping the mouth, yes, there is a way to do it safely. And you don't have to cover the mouth, and of course with younger children and things like that, you have to be very, very careful with. But yeah, there's something certainly happening there, but it's not that everybody needs to tape. It's those individuals who are waking up with a dry mouth in the morning. And I will guarantee you this, you line up any rugby squad, I would say 50% of that group is mouth breathing, and that's impacting their physiology.
Yeah, yeah. And the knock-on effects, you kind of start to touch on it, but they're incredible. And the mental health, like, there's essentially a direct correlation between mouth breathing and poor mental health.
I would say so.
That's
without a doubt. Yes.
Yeah, it's not a stretch. It's simple as.
Yeah.
And I could extrapolate that out very easily, but I won't. But the what was I going to say there? The knock-on effect. So if you have poor sleep, you'll then be far more likely to go for coffee, okay? And you'll drink more coffee. And coffee is fine, don't get me wrong, but you'll drink extra coffees because you've had poor sleep. That then gives you the jitters. That then leads to low-level anxiety. I'm not to overdo it, but just the jitters. And I actually have in the last while started to be very aware of my coffee in the last year or two, just trying to lower it down. And because, I find that when I get a little bit stressed, I'd have an extra coffee, or that kind of stuff. So at least more coffee. It also, when you've had poor sleep, the brain wants calories to get more energy. So you're more likely to get shitty food. So you think about it, if you've had a really rough sleep, you are more likely to get the donut in the morning. Fact. And so now you're eating sugary because you feel you just subconscious feel you need that energy. So the poor sleep then is linked to that kind of stuff. And then you can just keep going forever. You eat the donut and then you feel that then affects your gut microbiome, which affects your thinking, affects your mood, affects your mental health once again. And so it's just a big circle,
And it comes back to, can we have absolute focus of the mind if our sleep quality is poor? I don't think anybody with mental health issues is going to address their mental health. But these people, so if we look at the anxiety and panic disorder population, 75% of this group has dysfunctional breathing. Now, they normally go to their psychologist or their psychiatrist or their psychotherapist. They do cognitive behavioral training, which is great, but it doesn't address respiratory physiology. But what about that person with mental health issues who has poor sleep quality, is heavily snoring, is stopping breathing during sleep, is waking up exhausted? And there's a huge correlation between depression and sleep apnea. But yet that person with depression is going again to their psychotherapist and their psychologist and their psychiatrist. How many of those professionals, healthcare professionals, understand about sleep? See, we're operating with the human being, almost splitting it up into separate functions. And as you pointed out, the connection between the microbiome and the brain, the connection between our sleep and our eating habits. Breathing is tying in there as well. So often when I look at it, we see breathing, I see sleep quality, and I see the mind. If the mind is racing, you're not going to fall asleep easy. But if you've got poor quality sleep, your mind is racing. If your mind is racing, your breathing is faster and harder because you're stressed. But if your breathing is faster and harder, your mind is racing. And if your breathing is fast and harder, your sleep quality is poorer. And it's very easy to, I often feel that breathing, of course, we need more research. And that would be my quest in terms of showing the credibility that there's something really important here and bringing the science into it, because there's so much nonsense out there and all of the woo-woo and all of that crap, because all it's done, it's made a mess of it and it's put people off. And I wrote a paper with 2 ear, nose and throat doctors looking at everyday breathing and how it affects sleep apnea, peer-reviewed, published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine.